Commander Thexera had seen many species in her 3 centuries of service to the Galactic Coalition. She had fought alongside the methodical Kytherian hive minds, whose tactical precision could calculate victory probabilities to the 3rd decimal place. She had witnessed the Zephyrian cloud dancers phase through solid matter during their elegant aerial assaults. She had even commanded the massive Thorian stone speakers, beings whose very footsteps could crack planetary foundations. But nothing had prepared her for humans. The first time she met Captain Sarah Chun of the Terran Expeditionary Force, Thexera was struck by how utterly ordinary the creature appeared. No natural armor plating like her own Velthani carapace. No enhanced sensory organs. No obvious predatory adaptations. The human stood barely chest-high to Thexera's imposing 2-meter frame, with soft pink skin that looked like it would tear at the slightest provocation. "Commander," the human had said, extending a small, delicate appendage. "Honor to serve alongside you." Thexera had carefully taken the offered hand, mindful not to crush the fragile bones with her armored grip. The human's grip was surprisingly firm, though laughably weak compared to any coalition species. What struck her most was the creature's eyes, an unusual blue color that seemed to hold depths she couldn't quite fathom. That was 6 months ago, before the Shadowkin invasion, before she learned what humans truly were. The briefing room aboard the Coalition dreadnought Eternal Vigilance hummed with nervous energy. Representatives from 12 different species sat around the crystalline conference table, their various breathing apparatus and environmental suits creating a symphony of mechanical sounds. The holographic display at the center showed the Kepler 442 system, where 3 human colonies had gone dark in the past week. Reconnaissance drones confirmed Shadowkin presence, Admiral Corinth announced, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he processed the data streams. Estimated force strength, 3 battle fleets, approximately 2 million combat units. A collective shudder ran through the assembled officers. The Shadowkin were nightmare fuel made manifest, beings of living darkness that consumed light, heat, and life itself. They had swept through 17 systems in the past year, leaving nothing but frozen, lifeless husks of worlds behind them. "The humans have requested immediate assistance," Corinth continued. "However, long-range scans show significant Shadowkin penetration of the inner system. Any rescue attempt will likely arrive too late for civilian evacuation." Captain Chun stood slowly, her movements precise and controlled. "Admiral, with respect, the colonists are still alive." "Captain, I understand your species' attachment to individual lives, but we must consider the larger strategic picture. 3 colonies, roughly 2 million humans, against a Shadowkin force of equivalent size. The mathematics are clear." Chen's expression didn't change, but Thexera noticed something subtle shift in the human's posture. A tension that hadn't been there before. "Admiral, I'm not questioning your tactical assessment, but my people don't abandon their own." "Captain, even if we commit our entire battle group, the best outcome would be recovering perhaps 10% of the colonists while losing significant coalition assets. The logical course is strategic withdrawal." The human was quiet for a long moment, those strange blue eyes studying the hologram. When she spoke, her voice carried an odd quality that made Thexera's combat instincts prickle with unease. "Admiral, may I propose an alternative?" Thexera watched this exchange with growing fascination. In all her years of service, she had never seen a single captain challenge fleet command so calmly. Most species would either submit immediately to superior authority or explode into dominance displays. Humans seemed to occupy some middle ground she didn't quite understand. "Speak," Corinth said grudgingly. "Give me my ship and a volunteer force. Fast attack vessels only. We'll use hit and run tactics to draw the Shadowkin away from the colonies while the main fleet positions for a coordinated rescue operation." "That's suicide, Captain. A handful of ships against 3 battle fleets." Chun smiled, and Thexera felt that strange prickle again. There was something predatory in that expression, something that didn't match the human's soft appearance. "Admiral, My species has been perfecting asymmetric warfare since before we left our home planet. Trust me on this one. Admiral Corintha's eyes cycled through rapid blinks as he processed. Very well, but I won't order anyone to follow you on this mission. Understood, sir. As the briefing concluded, Thexera found herself approaching the human captain. She wasn't entirely sure why. Captain Chun, she said, her translator struggling with the soft syllables of human names. Commander Thexera, thank you for staying. I wanted to discuss your tactical proposal. As an exercise in military theory, of course. Chin turned those unsettling blue eyes on her. Of course. Walk with me. They moved through the ship's corridors, past the various species going about their duties. Thexera noticed how other crew members reacted to the human, not with fear or dominance displays, but with an odd sort of deference. Respect tinged with something else. You meant what you said about asymmetric warfare, Thexera observed. Humans have been prey species for most of our evolution, Chin replied matter-of-factly. We learned early that you don't fight predators head-on. You outsmart them. You use their strengths against them. You make them afraid. The Shadowkin don't feel fear. Everything feels fear, Commander. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure points. They reached the observation deck, where the starfield stretched endlessly beyond reinforced transparent aluminum. Chin moved to the viewing port with fluid grace that reminded Thexera of hunting cats from her homeworld. You're planning something more than hidden, run attacks, Thexera said. The Shadowkin are parasites, Chin replied. They need to feed constantly to maintain their energy matrices. That's why they travel in such large fleets. They consume everything in a system, then move on. But what happens if you cut off their food supply? Thexera's tactical training kicked in. They would begin consuming each other to maintain cohesion. But that would require isolating sections of their fleet. Exactly. Small, fast ships making precision strikes at their support vessels. Force them to spread their defenses thin. Make them choose between protecting their supply lines and maintaining fleet cohesion. It was elegant in its simplicity and absolutely insane by any conventional military doctrine. The casualty rates for the attacking force would be catastrophic. How many ships would you need? Thexera found herself asking. 12 fast attack craft. Crews of 5 to 8 each. Volunteers only. The survival rate. Chun turned from the viewport, and Thexera saw something in those blue eyes that made her unconsciously check her weapon's charge status. It wasn't anger or rage, though she could understand. It was something colder, more patient. Commander, my species spent 10,000 years fighting everything on our planet that wanted to eat us. We learned that sometimes survival isn't about avoiding death. It's about making sure the other guy dies first. Over the next 6 hours, word spread through the fleet about the human captain's mission. Thexera watched from the command deck as volunteer lists filled up faster than the communication systems could process them. It was unprecedented. 12 different species, all volunteering for what amounted to a suicide mission because a single human had asked. She found Captain Chun in the hangar bay, inspecting the small fleet that had assembled. Sleek Kytherian interceptors, Zephyrian phase shift scouts, even a massive Thorian assault pod that had been modified for speed over armor. Impressiva turnout, taxada comanta. Good people, Chin replied simply. Though I notice you haven't submitted volunteer papers. Thexera's mandibles clicked in what her species used for nervous laughter. My strategic value to the fleet is considerable, Chun finished. Which is exactly why I need you. Captain, I've reviewed your tactical proposals. The mathematical probability of success is less than 12%. The probability of total unit loss exceeds 90%. Chin nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. Commander, what's the Coalition's standard doctrine for dealing with Shadowkin incursions? Strategic withdrawal. Evacuate what populations possible. Establish defensive perimeters at choke point systems. Wait for them to move on after consuming available resources. How's that working out? Thexera's silence was answer enough. 17 systems lost. Billions of lives consumed. The Shadowkin were spreading faster than the Coalition could retreat. My people have a saying, Chun continued, running her hand along the hull of a modified interceptor. Sometimes you have to go through hell to get home. The question is whether you trust your squad to get you through it. Thexera looked around the hangar at the assembled volunteers, Kytherian hive minds who had never operated outside their collective consciousness, Zephyrians who could phase through matter but had never faced beings of living shadow, Thorians whose massive strength was useless against enemies that fed on kinetic energy. All of them here because a single human had asked, "What makes you think this plan will work?" Thexera asked. Chin's smile was sharp enough to cut. Because the Shadowkin have never fought humans before. They don't know what we're capable of when you back us into a corner. The human began walking toward her assigned ship, a heavily modified Terran interceptor bristling with weapon systems Thexera didn't recognize. You're familiar with human military history, Commander? Basic studies. Required reading for coalition officers. Then, you know about the Battle of Thermopylae. 300 Spartans holding off an army of hundreds of thousands. Not because they were stronger or faster or better equipped, but because they were willing to die to protect what mattered to them. Chin paused at the access ramp to her ship. The difference between humans and every other species I've met is simple, Commander. We don't calculate acceptable losses when it comes to our own. We find a way to win, or we make sure everyone remembers why we tried. Thexera watched the human disappear into her ship, then looked around the hangar again. 12 ships, maybe 100 volunteers, against 3 Shadowkin battle fleets. She activated her wrist communicator. Flight operations, this is Commander Thexera. Request permission to transfer to temporary duty assignment with Captain Chen's task force. Confirm your request, Commander. You're volunteering for the Kepler 442 mission. Thexera looked at the assembled ships, then at the stars beyond the hangar's magnetic barrier. Somewhere out there, 2 million humans were waiting for rescue that conventional wisdom said would never come. Confirmed. Authorization Thexera 77 Alpha. As she walked toward the remaining empty ship, a fast Velthani interceptor that had been modified for multi-species compatibility, she felt something she hadn't experienced in her 3 centuries of service. Not fear, but that was certainly present. Something else. Anticipation. For the first time in her military career, she was about to fight alongside beings who refused to accept defeat as an option. She was about to learn what humans meant when they talked about impossible victories and last stands that turned the tide of history. She was about to discover why, among the many species of the galaxy, only humans had developed the concept of martyrdom as a military tactic. The hangar erupted in controlled chaos as final preparations began. Weapon systems were charged, navigation computers updated with the latest intelligence, emergency supplies loaded. But, through it all, Thexera noticed something unusual about the human crew members scattered throughout the volunteer force. They were singing. Not war chants or battle hymns like her own people might use to work up combat fury. Soft, melodic songs in their strange tonal language. Songs that spoke of going home, of protecting family, of standing together against the dark. It was then that Thexera realized something that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The humans weren't planning to die in the Kepler 442 system. They were planning to live. All of them. Every single colonist, every volunteer, everyone who had trusted them to find a way. And, somehow impossibly, they believed they could do it. As her interceptor's engines hummed to life, Thexera began to understand why the galaxy's military academies had started including human tactical doctrine in their required curriculum. Not because humans were particularly strong or fast or technologically advanced, but because they had weaponized hope itself. The fleet formed up in loose formation as they prepared to jump to hyperspace. Captain Chen's voice crackled across the communication channels, speaking to the assembled volunteers in that calm, controlled tone that somehow made impossible odds sound like minor inconveniences. All ships, this is actual. Mission parameters are simple. We go in fast, we hit them hard, and we bring everyone home. No exceptions. No acceptable losses. We find a way, or we make one. Thexera checked her weapon systems, one final time as the jump coordinates locked in. Around her, 11 other ships prepared to follow a single human into a battle that conventional wisdom said they couldn't win. She thought about the Shadowkin fleets waiting in the Kepler 442 system, ancient beings of living darkness who had consumed entire civilizations, who had never known defeat, who had no concept of mercy or restraint. They were about to meet humanity. And for the first time since the Shadowkin invasion began, Thexera found herself pitying the enemy. The hyperspace jump to Kepler 442 took 18 hours. During that time, Thexera learned more about human nature than in all her previous encounters with the species combined. She discovered this during what Captain Chun called a tactical briefing, though it resembled no military planning session Thexera had ever witnessed. The 12 ships maintained formation in hyperspace while their crews shared data, stories, and something humans called coffee through matter transmitters. The key to understanding Shadowkin behavior, Chun explained over the comm system, is recognizing that they're not really individual entities. They're fragments of a larger consciousness that got broken apart eons ago. Each fragment desperately wants to rejoin the whole, but they can't remember what the original consciousness was like. Thexera studied the tactical displays showing Shadowkin fleet movements. This explains their aggressive expansion patterns. They're not conquering, they're searching. Exactly. Which means they have a weakness we can exploit. The weakness, Chun explained, was loneliness. Shadowkin fragments fed on energy, yes, but they were drawn to certain types of energy more than others. Life force was preferred because it carried emotional resonance. Fear was particularly nutritious because it created psychic feedback loops. But there was one type of energy that Shadowkin found irresistible, even though it was ultimately toxic to them. Hope. Hope burns brighter than any other emotion, Chun said, her voice carrying across the fleet channels. It's concentrated life force, pure potential energy. Shadowkin can't resist it, but they can't properly digest it either. It tears them apart from the inside. Thexera's tactical training rebelled against this explanation. Captain, you're describing psychological warfare against entities that predate most known civilizations. How can you be certain of these behavioral patterns? There was a pause before Chun responded, and when she did, her voice carried an odd note. Because we've fought them before. The communication channels went silent. Even the background chatter from other ships ceased. Captain, came a voice from one of the Kytherian interceptors. Terran first contact with Coalition forces was only 43 years ago. Shadowkin incursions into known space began 18 months ago. First contact with the Coalition, Chun corrected. Humans have been exploring beyond our home system for over 2 centuries. We just didn't advertise our presence until we were sure we could handle whatever we found out here. Thexera felt her combat instinct spike again, the same predatory alertness she'd experienced during their first conversation. Captain, are you saying Terra has had previous encounters with Shadowkin forces? I'm saying Terra has had encounters with a lot of things. Some we learned to avoid. Some we learned to fight. Some we learned to kill. The matter-of-fact way Chun delivered this information was somehow more unsettling than any threat display. Thexera activated a private channel to the human captain. Chun, exactly how long has your species been capable of interstellar travel? The response was immediate and private. Officially, 45 years. Unofficially, we've been traveling between stars since before your people developed spaceflight. That's impossible. Your technological development was extensively documented during first contact protocols. We showed you what we wanted you to see. Standard procedure when encountering unknown alien civilizations. Thexera's mind raced through the implications. You've been watching us. All of us. The entire coalition. For about 300 years, yes. We needed to understand what we were dealing with before revealing ourselves. And your conclusion? Chen's laugh was audible even over the private channel. That most species develop interstellar travel, advanced weapons, and complex social structures before they learn how to think strategically about survival. You're all very impressive, but you're not particularly paranoid. And humans are? Commander, We spent most of our evolutionary history as prey animals on a planet where literally everything else was trying to eat us. Paranoia isn't just useful, it's mandatory. The private channel closed, and Chen's voice returned to the fleet frequency. ETA to system entry is 4 hours. Final tactical briefings begin now. All squadron leaders report to Channel 7. Over the next 4 hours, Thexera watched the human captain methodically dismantle 3 centuries of accepted military doctrine. The plan Chen outlined wasn't just unconventional. It was actively insane by any rational standard. The 12 ships would enter the Kepler 442 system in 4 groups. The first group would conduct long-range reconnaissance while broadcasting distress signals designed to attract Shadowkin attention. The second group would position themselves near the outer planets and begin systematic attacks on Shadowkin support vessels. The third group would penetrate deeper into the system, targeting command nodes and communication relays. The fourth group, consisting of only Chen's ship and 2 volunteers, would proceed directly to the primary colony world. Captain, Commander Veltar, the Thorian assault pod, interjected. Proceeding to the colony world with minimal escort is strategically unsound. Shadowkin forces will be concentrated there. That's the idea, Chen replied. We want their attention. Thexera studied the tactical projections. Captain, even if the diversion tactics succeed, you'll be facing overwhelming enemy numbers at the colony. What's your extraction plan? We don't extract. We hold position until the main rescue fleet arrives. With 3 ships. With whatever it takes. The casual way Chan discussed certain death made Thexera's carapace itch with nervous energy. She'd fought alongside brave warriors before, but this was something else entirely. This was a species that had systematically eliminated the concept of acceptable losses from their military vocabulary. As they prepared for system entry, Thexera found herself paired with Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a human pilot who couldn't have been more than 25 standard years old by her species' aging calculations. His ship was a modified Terran interceptor that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and wishful thinking. First time fighting alongside humans? Webb asked over their linked communication system. Yes, your reputation among coalition forces is mixed. Webb's laughter echoed through her cockpit. Mixed how? Effective, but reckless. Brave, but unpredictable. Successful, but at terrible cost. Sound about right. Anything else? Taksara azitata. There are stories. Rumors about human units that refuse to retreat even when facing impossible odds. Military historians call it the Terra syndrome, the tendency of human forces to achieve victory in scenarios where victory should be mathematically impossible. Well, Webb said cheerfully, you're about to see it firsthand. The Kepler 442 system materialized around them like a nightmare given form. The star itself flickered with unstable energy patterns where Shadowkin had been feeding on its corona. 2 of the outer planets showed the characteristic dead black coloration of worlds drained of all thermal energy. And everywhere, filling the spaces between planets like a malignant infection, were the Shadowkin fleets. Thexera's sensors registered over 3,000 individual contacts. Ships that seemed to absorb light itself, moving in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The largest vessels were kilometers long, their surfaces writhing with dark energy discharges that made her ship's shielding crackle with feedback static. All units, this is actual, Chen's voice cut through the sensor noise. Shadowkin forces confirm 3 battle fleets, as estimated. Primary concentration around Kepler 442c, approximately 2.3 million individuals still showing life signs. 2.3 million humans clustered on a single world, while living darkness swarmed through the system around them. Squadron leaders confirm tactical positions. We execute in 60 seconds. Thexera watched her tactical display as the 12 ships dispersed according to Chen's plan. It looked like watching someone throw pebbles at a landslide, futile gestures against overwhelming force. Actual, this is Overwatch, came the voice from the reconnaissance squadron. Enemy response patterns are unusual. Clarify, Overwatch. They're not reacting to our presence defensively. Shadowkin forces are moving to intercept, but they're leaving defensive positions around the colony world. It's like they're more interested in us than in maintaining their siege. Chin's response carried a grim satisfaction. Confirmed, Overwatch. Remember, hope burns brighter than fear. They can't resist it, even when they should. The first engagement began 90 seconds after system entry. Fexera watched on long-range sensors as Squadron 2 opened fire on a cluster of Shadowkin support vessels near the system's asteroid belt. The weapon's fire lit up the darkness like desperate stars, pulse cannons, and plasma torpedoes carving brief holes in the living shadows. For a moment, it looked like the attack might actually succeed. Several Shadowkin vessels lost cohesion, their dark forms dissipating into component particles. But then, the rest of the fleet began to move. It was like watching a tide turn. Thousands of shadow ships converged on Squadron 2's position, moving with fluid grace that defied physics. Within minutes, the brave volunteers were fighting for their lives against impossible odds. Squadron 2 pulled back to secondary positions, Chun ordered. Negative, actual, came the reply from Commander Yithke, leader of the Kytherian interceptors. We can hold them here. Continue mission parameters. Fexera watched in fascination and growing horror as the Kytherian hive minds coordinated their attack with inhuman precision. Their ships moved like extensions of a single consciousness, each pilot knowing exactly where their wingmates would be at any given moment. They wove through the Shadowkin swarm like dancers, dealing death with mathematical certainty. But the Shadowkin adapted. That was their nature, ancient predators that had survived by learning from every encounter. Their initial chaotic response gave way to organized tactics. They began predicting the Kytherians' coordinated movements, laying traps, forcing the interceptors into killing boxes. Squadron 2 is taking heavy casualties, Fexera reported. Recommend immediate tactical withdrawal. Negative, came Yitheke's voice, now strained with effort. We're drawing significant enemy forces away from colony approaches. Mission parameters hold. One by one, Fexera watched the bright spots on her tactical display wink out. The Kytherian interceptors fought with desperate precision until the very end, their hive mind connection allowing them to coordinate even as individual ships fell. When the last interceptor finally succumbed to the Shadowkin swarm, they had destroyed nearly 30 enemy vessels and drawn almost a full battle fleet away from the inner system. The communication channels remained silent for long moments after Squadron 2 went dark. Finally, Chen's voice crackled across the fleet frequency. Squadron 2 is confirmed lost. All remaining units continue mission parameters. We honor their sacrifice by completing the objective. This, Fexera realized, was what humans meant by weaponizing hope. Not just the willingness to die for a cause, but the ability to transform death itself into a tactical advantage. The Kytherians hadn't died in vain. They had died as part of a larger plan, their sacrifice creating opportunities for others to exploit. Squadron 3, begin your attack run, Chun continued. The second phase of the operation unfolded with similar terrible precision. Squadron 3, consisting of Zephyrian phase shift scouts and modified Thorian assault craft, penetrated deep into the Shadowkin fleet structure. Their target was the command nodes, massive vessels that coordinated the swarm's movements through some form of collective consciousness interface. The Zephyrians led the assault, their ships phasing in and out of normal space to avoid enemy fire. Behind them came the Thorians, their massive vessels bristling with kinetic weapons that could punch through almost any known armor. But the Shadowkin had learned from the first engagement. They were ready. As Squadron 3 approached the command nodes, the enemy fleet suddenly collapsed inward, forming a sphere of living darkness around the attacking ships. The Zephyrians found their phase-shifting abilities disrupted by dark energy fields, forcing them back into normal space where mass Shadowkin fire tore them apart. The Thorians lasted longer, their thick armor plating absorbing tremendous punishment, but even they eventually succumbed to the overwhelming firepower. Before the last Thorian ship exploded, Commander Veltar transmitted a final message: target structures identified, sending coordinates to actual. Squadron 3 had lasted exactly 11 minutes against the main Shadowkin fleet. In that time, they had identified 17 critical command nodes and destroyed 4 of them before being overwhelmed. Squadron 1, you're cleared for precision strikes on transmitted coordinates, Chen ordered. Thexera found herself part of Squadron 1's attack run, her modified interceptor screaming through the outer system toward the coordinates Squadron 3 had died to obtain. Around her, the surviving ships of the volunteer force pressed their attack with mechanical determination. She realized something profound was happening. Each tactical phase built on the sacrifice of the previous one. The Kytherians had drawn away fleet elements and identified response patterns. The Zephyrians and Thorians had located critical targets and disrupted command structures. Now Squadron 1 was exploiting the intelligence previous units had died to obtain. It was brilliant. It was horrible. It was completely, utterly human. Actual, this is Recon Lead, came a new voice over the communication channels. Colony World approach vector is clear. Shadowkin forces have abandoned siege positions to respond to fleet incursions. Confirmed, Recon Lead. Squadron 4 is beginning final approach. Thexera's sensors tracked Chen's small formation as it penetrated toward Kepler 442c. 3 ships against whatever Shadowkin forces remained around the colony world. Their mission was simple in concept, impossible in execution. Establish a defensive perimeter around 2 million human civilians and hold it until the main coalition rescue fleet arrived. Estimated time until fleet arrival, 6 hours. Estimated survival time for 3 ships against concentrated Shadowkin forces, 47 minutes. All remaining units, final phase begins now, Chen announced. Squadron 1, continue precision strikes on command nodes. Squadron 4 will establish defensive positions around the colony. We hold until relief arrives. Thexera armed her ship's weapons systems and dove toward her assigned target. A command node the size of a small moon, its surface crawling with dark energy discharges. Around her, the last surviving volunteers pressed their own attacks with desperate precision. As her missiles impacted the Shadowkin vessel, tearing holes in its living shadow hull, Thexera finally understood what humans meant when they talked about impossible victories. They didn't achieve them through superior technology or overwhelming force. They achieved them through the simple refusal to accept that victory was impossible. Each tactical phase was designed not just to inflict damage, but to create new opportunities for the next phase. Even their deaths served the larger strategic objective. The Shadowkin were ancient and powerful, but they had never faced an enemy that treated hope itself as a weapon of war. On her tactical display, she watched Chen's small formation take position around the colony world as thousands of Shadowkin ships converged on their location. 6 hours until relief arrived. 3 human ships standing between 2 million civilians and living darkness. Thexera found herself smiling as she pressed her next attack run. For the first time in 3 centuries of military service, she was fighting alongside beings who had forgotten how to lose. The real battle was about to begin. The defense of Kepler 442c began with 3 ships against impossible odds and ended with the galaxy learning a new definition of the word impossible. Thexera watched the tactical display from her position in the outer system as Chen's small formation took defensive positions around the colony world. The mathematics were brutal. 3 ships, maybe 40 crew members total, facing a Shadowkin force that had been conservatively estimated at 500,000 combat units. The first wave hit them 18 minutes after they established orbit. Actual, this is colony defense, came Chen's voice over the communication channels, calm and controlled as if she were discussing weather patterns. We have multiple Shadowkin formations approaching from vectors 7 through 12. Estimate initial contact in 90 seconds. Fexera's sensors registered the approaching swarm, a mass of living darkness that seemed to bend space around it as it moved. Individual Shadowkin ships merged and separated like droplets of liquid mercury, forming attack patterns that defied conventional tactical analysis. Colony defense, you are vastly outnumbered. Admiral Corinth's voice cut through the static from the approaching coalition fleet. Recommend immediate tactical withdrawal. Negative, Fleet Command, Chen replied. 2 million civilians down there are counting on us to buy them time. We don't abandon our own. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. Instead of trying to engage the entire Shadowkin swarm, Chen's small formation split up and began what could only be described as three-dimensional guerrilla warfare. They used the planet's gravity well, its moon system, even the orbital debris from previous battles to mask their movements and create killing fields. Lieutenant Webb's interceptor dove into the planet's upper atmosphere, skimming the edge of space while Shadowkin pursuit ships struggled to match his maneuvers without burning up in atmospheric friction. Behind him, the two other human vessels, piloted by Captain Rodriguez and Commander Singh, used the planet's magnetic field to disrupt Shadowkin sensors while laying mines in orbital approach corridors. Colony defense, what's your tactical assessment? Admiral Corinth asked. We're making them work for it, Chen replied. Fexera watched in fascination as the humans implemented tactics that violated everything she'd learned about space combat. They fought like they were still prey animals, using every environmental advantage to even odds that should have been insurmountable. When direct combat was unavoidable, they struck hard and fast before disappearing into sensor shadows and debris fields. But the Shadowkin were learning. Ancient beings with millions of years of combat experience began adapting to human tactics. They stopped pursuing individual ships into atmosphere boundaries and started laying traps of their own. They began coordinating their attacks with the cold precision of a hive mind, cutting off escape routes and forcing the humans into direct confrontations. One by one, the defensive advantages began to disappear. Colony defense, you've been holding position for 3 hours, came Admiral Corinth's voice. Coalition Fleet ETA is 90 minutes. Can you maintain? There was a pause before Chen responded, and when she did, her voice carried new strain. Fleet Command, we've lost Rodriguez's ship to concentrated fire. Singh is running on backup power only. My ship has taken significant damage to propulsion systems. Fexera checked her own tactical situation. Squadron 1 had successfully destroyed 11 of the 17 command nodes, but at terrible cost. Only 4 ships remained operational, and all were running low on ammunition and power reserves. Captain, she activated a private channel to Chun. With respect, you've done everything possible. 2 ships cannot hold against the remaining Shadowkin forces. Commander, Chen's reply was immediate. Are you familiar with the Battle of Saragossa? No. Spanish city, Earth. Early 19th century. Besieged by Napoleon's army for 61 days. The defenders were vastly outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from all support. Military experts said the city would fall in a week. On her tactical display, Fexera watched Shadowkin forces massing for what looked like a final, overwhelming assault on the colony world. What happened? The civilians took up arms. Every man, woman, and child in the city became a combatant. They didn't have military training or professional equipment, but they had something Napoleon's army didn't understand, which was nothing left to lose. Chen's ship suddenly broke orbit and began diving toward the planet's surface. Behind her, Singh's damaged vessel followed in a power descent that looked more like controlled falling than flying. Colony defense, what are you doing? Admiral Corinth's voice carried new urgency. Fleet Command, we're implementing Plan Zulu. All civilians are being armed and organized into defensive units. If the Shadowkin want this planet, they're going to have to take it house by house, street by street. Fexera felt her combat instincts spike with alarm. Captain, you're talking about turning civilians into combatants against beings that feed on life force. That's not defensive strategy, that's genocide. No, Commander. Chen's voice carried an odd note of satisfaction. That's exactly what the Shadow can think it is, which is why it's going to work. Over the next hour, Thexera watched something unprecedented unfold on the colony world below. Instead of evacuating civilians to protected shelters, the humans were doing the opposite, spreading them throughout the colony cities in coordinated defensive positions. But they weren't just handing out weapons randomly. Through intercepted civilian communication channels, Thexera could hear the systematic organization of something that sounded like a military operation planned by professionals and executed by amateurs who refused to accept that they weren't professionals. Sector 7. This is Lisa Chun, age 16. About 43 volunteers with hunting rifles positioned in the old shopping district. We've rigged the main street with homemade explosives salvaged from mining equipment. Confirmed, Lisa. This is Dr. Marcus Webb, age 64, grandfather of pilot Marcus Webb currently in orbit. I've got medical staff and wounded civilians in the hospital complex. We've turned the building into a fortress using hospital beds and surgical equipment as barriers. Anyone who wants to hurt my patients will have to come through me. Medical complex. This is teacher Sarah Rodriguez, age 41, wife of Captain Rodriguez. I've organized all the school children into messenger and supply units. They're moving ammunition and medical supplies through the old maintenance tunnels. If any Shadowkin want to harm children, they'll find out why human mothers are the most dangerous creatures in the known galaxy. The communications continued like this. Ordinary humans with ordinary jobs transforming themselves into a coordinated resistance network. But there was something else, something that made Thexera's tactical training rebel against what she was hearing. They weren't afraid. Terrified civilians facing ancient beings of living darkness. And they sounded like they were organizing a community festival rather than preparing for a siege that would likely kill them all. Fleet Command. Thexera activated her communication system. Are you monitoring civilian channels from the colony? Confirmed. We're having difficulty understanding their tactical organization. They appear to be implementing defensive strategies that prioritize civilian involvement rather than civilian protection. Admiral, with respect, I don't think they're trying to protect the civilians. I think they're trying to weaponize them. Before Admiral Corinth could respond, the Shadowkin assault began. Thexera watched thousands of dark forms descend toward the colony like a plague of hungry ghosts. They moved with the fluid grace of predators who had never known defeat, flowing around defensive positions and seeking the brightest concentrations of life force. What they found waiting for them defied every principle of how prey species were supposed to behave when cornered. The first Shadowkin units to reach the colony encountered not cowering civilians, but coordinated resistance that turned every street into a killing zone. Humans who had never held weapons before that day fought with the desperate precision of professional soldiers. Children as young as 12 coordinated supply movements through underground tunnels. Elderly civilians rigged improvised explosives with the expertise of combat engineers. But more importantly, they fought with hope. Not the desperate hope of the doomed, but the bright, fierce hope of people who had decided they were going to win despite impossible odds. Every successful defensive action, every Shadowkin unit destroyed, every small tactical victory fed that hope until it burned like a star. And the Shadowkin began to die. Not from a weapon's fire, though that was effective enough. Not from the improvised explosives or the clever tactical ambushes. They died because they were feeding on emotional energy that was toxic to their nature. Hope, as Captain Chun had explained, burned too bright for Shadowkin to properly digest. And 2 million humans defending their homes generated hope on a scale that turned the planet into a weapon. Fleet Command, came Chen's voice from the surface. Shadowkin assault forces are taking significant casualties. They're actually retreating from some defensive sectors. Thexera watched her tactical display in fascination. For the first time since the Shadowkin invasion began, An enemy assault was being repelled not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through sheer force of will made manifest. Colony defense. How are civilian casualties? Surprisingly light. The Shadowkin seem to be avoiding direct contact with civilian populations when possible. They're focusing attacks on military targets and infrastructure. Admiral Corintha's voice carried confusion. That makes no tactical sense. Civilian populations should be primary targets for life force consumption. Unless, Thexera said slowly, the civilian populations are generating energy that's actively harmful to Shadowkin metabolism. She activated long-range sensors and focused on the colony world surface. What she found made her question everything she thought she understood about the nature of warfare. The planet was glowing, not with artificial light or thermal signatures, but with something her sensors could barely quantify. Emotional resonance patterns that registered as a form of exotic radiation. The entire world was broadcasting hope, determination, and defiant joy on frequencies that made her ship's shielding hum with harmonic feedback. Fleet Command, she reported, I'm reading massive psychic emissions from the colony surface. The human civilian population appears to be generating a form of energy field that's actively hostile to Shadowkin life forms. Elaborate. They're not just defending themselves, Admiral. They're turning their entire planet into a weapon that kills by making the enemy too happy to maintain metabolic cohesion. The absurdity of that statement would have made her laugh under any other circumstances. Ancient beings of living darkness, terror of the known galaxy, being defeated by excessive optimism. Colony defense. Admiral Corintha's voice carried new urgency. Coalition fleet will arrive in 30 minutes. Can you maintain current defensive posture? Chen's response was immediate. Fleet Command, we're not just maintaining. We're winning. Shadowkin forces are retreating from multiple sectors. Civilian volunteers are actually pursuing them in some areas. Pursuing them? Admiral, you have to understand something about humans, Chun continued, her voice carrying exhaustion, but also fierce satisfaction. We don't just fight to survive. We fight to win. And when we start winning, we don't stop. Thexera activated her visual sensors and focused on the colony surface. She watched elderly humans, some using medical assistance devices, manning defensive positions with the calm professionalism of veteran warriors. And through it all, she heard the singing. Human civilians, in the middle of a battle for their lives against beings of living nightmare, were singing. Work songs, lullabies, folk melodies, military marches, anything that helped them coordinate their efforts and maintain morale. The Shadowkin, predators who had consumed entire civilizations, were being driven back by an enemy that refused to stop singing. Fleet Command, this is colony defense. Chen's voice crackled through the communication system. Be advised, civilian volunteers are requesting permission to pursue fleeing Shadowkin units into the outer system. Apparently, some of our more enthusiastic defenders want to finish the job properly. Admiral Corintha's pause was significant. Colony defense. Are you telling me that human civilians want to pursue Shadowkin forces into space? Admiral, I'm telling you that human civilians want to make sure this never happens again to anyone, anywhere. They've decided the Shadowkin represent an unacceptable threat to their families, and they're prepared to do something about it. Thexera found herself laughing, a sound that came out as chittering clicks through her species' vocal apparatus. After 3 centuries of military service, she was witnessing the galaxy's apex predators being defeated by an enemy whose primary tactical advantage was their refusal to accept that defeat was possible. The Coalition rescue fleet arrived to find the Kepler 442 system completely under human control. Shadowkin forces that had numbered in the millions were either destroyed or in full retreat. 3 colony worlds that had been written off as lost were not only intact, but actively expanding their defensive perimeters. And, in the middle of it all, 2 million human civilians were celebrating victory with the same joyous determination they had used to achieve it. Fleet Command, Admiral Corintha's voice carried a note of profound respect. I am formally recommending that human tactical doctrine be incorporated into all coalition military training programs. Understood, Admiral, came the reply. I'm also recommending that never underestimate humans be added as the first rule of combat engagement protocols. As the rescue fleet took position around the colony worlds, Thexera found herself contemplating the events of the past day. 12 ships and roughly 100 volunteers had successfully defended 3 worlds against a force that had previously consumed entire star systems. Not through superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but through the simple refusal to accept that victory was impossible. She activated a private communication channel to Captain Chun, who was coordinating relief efforts from the colony surface. "Captain, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Commander. Earlier, you mentioned that humans have been exploring space for centuries, that you've encountered other threats before the Shadowkin." "That's correct." "How many other threats?" Chen's pause was longer this time. When she responded, her voice carried the weight of experiences Thexera could only imagine. "Commander, the galaxy is a dangerous place. In our explorations, we've encountered 17 species that posed existential threats to inhabited worlds. Biological plagues that could sterilize planets. Machine intelligences that consumed entire systems. Energy beings that fed on stellar cores. And none of them are problems anymore." Thexera felt her combat instincts spike one final time. "Captain, what exactly are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that humans take threats to civilian populations very seriously. The Shadowkin invasion stopped here not just because we defended these colonies, but because we've decided the Shadowkin represent an unacceptable risk to inhabited worlds throughout the galaxy. You're planning to hunt them." "Commander, we're not planning to hunt them. We're planning to solve the Shadowkin problem permanently. Every fragment, every battle fleet, every trace of their civilization. They made the mistake of threatening human families." Chen's voice carried that same calm, controlled tone that had made Thexera nervous during their first conversation. "We're going to teach the galaxy what happens when you make humans angry enough to stop pretending we're just another civilized species." As the Coalition fleet settled into orbit around the liberated worlds, Thexera found herself understanding why the galaxy's military academies had quietly begun studying human tactical doctrine with obsessive thoroughness. It wasn't just that humans refused to accept defeat. It was that once they decided something was a threat to their families, they didn't stop until that threat no longer existed. Anywhere, in any form. The Shadowkin had made the fundamental error of assuming humans were just another prey species that would cower when faced with superior force. They were about to learn that humans were something far more dangerous. They were problem solvers, and the Shadowkin had just become a problem that needed solving.